Okay, the doll Donna here. This is my sister Cathy.
Hi.
I'm here in New Hampshire. I'm visiting, and she has agreed to share with us some paranormal experiences. She is actually, I consider her to be a sensitive because she has had many paranormal experiences throughout her life, and she's going to share with us her scariest paranormal experience she ever had. So, Cathy, so where did this all take place?
This was when I was married, and my ex-husband and I lived in a big gambrel in a small town in New Hampshire. And shortly after my daughter was born, we started experiencing various things. But I'm just going to detail a few of them. One of the first things that happened was one day, my daughter, who was about 2 at the time, and I were in the living room, and the front door was nearby, and suddenly the door handle started to shake violently up and down. So I got up to see who was shaking the door handle, and I looked out the window at the steps, and there was no one on the stoop, but the handle was still shaking up and down violently, and then all of a sudden it stopped. I never touched it. I was afraid to touch it because I didn't know what would happen to me. So that's pretty much where it started, and then various things kept happening. One thing was that, again, we were in the living room, and you went down a hall through the kitchen, and at the other end of the house there was a family room, and a lot of my daughter's toys were there. She had one ball. It was a heavy plastic ball. It was not something you threw because it was too heavy. It was not something that rolled. It was weighted at the bottom, and when you pushed on it, it would jingle and make a jingle sound, and that was one of her favorites. So one day we were in the living room, and the jingle ball, as we called it, was in the family room, and as we're playing quietly, we hear Jingle Ball start to jingle. And the windows weren't open, there was no breeze to blow it, there was nobody in there, it was just herself and myself. And then I thought, well, maybe I'm hearing things. And then suddenly she jumped up and she ran to the family room, and she came back in the living room and said, "Ball, ball." And she had Jingle Ball in her hands. So obviously she heard it too. And that was pretty frightening that Jingle Ball was jingling by itself.
Wow.
Then things escalated. I hit a point through a series of deductions where I felt that it was an Indian, and perhaps our home had been built on an Indian burial ground, but I just felt a strong inclination that this was an Indian. And what would happen would, I'd be downstairs, and my daughter was upstairs for her nap, and I'd hear screaming. She was screaming, so I would run up the stairs, and when I'd get into her room, the screaming stopped and she was sound asleep.
Oh, wow.
And that would happen often, and I started telling my ex about some of these instances, and he said I was crazy, I didn't know what I was talking about, I was making it up, I wanted attention, on and on. So one night I went to an aerobics class, and he was in charge, and he put her to bed, and he was sitting in the family room, and he started to hear her scream. So he ran up the stairs, and she was sound asleep. So he experienced this 3 or 4 times and admitted it to me, but he said, I think it's just somebody screaming from one of the other houses. But the houses were very far apart, and the windows were shut, so there was no way it was somebody else's child. So I kept trying to explore this idea that it was an Indian. And my ex we had a bookcase in the dining room, and on the front of the top shelf there was a train, a metal train, and we put it at the front so that the things behind it would not fall, or that our daughter couldn't grab anything from behind the train. She wasn't quite tall enough anyway, but in case she would pull over a chair, then obviously I'd hear that. And behind the train there were arrowheads and Indian weapons, a hatchet, various various items like that. Those were all things that my ex-husband brought from a place called Painted Post, New York. This is where he lived. The reason it was called Painted Post was because the Indians had massacred everyone in the village of Painted Post and painted the posts with the villagers' blood. Oh. So that's why it was called that. So all of these items came from Painted Post. He had dug them up, or he had bought them in shops that were nearby where they had found them. So one morning, he got up to go to work, and he was late, so he was running around the bedroom, getting dressed, ran down the stairs, and I heard the door shut, and he was gone. So maybe an hour later, I got up, and under the dining room table were laid out, all in a straight row, every arrowhead, every weapon. They were just all on the floor under the dining room table. But the train was still at the top. So I called him at work, and he was busy, and I said, "What kind of a joke are you playing on me? Because I think it's an Indian. You're going to be cute? You're going to do this to me?" He said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Never mind, we'll talk about it when you get home." And I slammed the phone down, and I left everything where it was. And I was so angry with him because I felt that he had done this just to mock me. He got home from work, and he walked in, and he said, "What were you talking about?" And I said, "Come here." And I brought him in the dining room, and he looked under the table, and his face turned white. And he said, "Why did you do this? Why did you do this to me?" I said, "I didn't do it. You did it. I didn't do it. I swear to God I didn't do it." So that convinced me it was an Indian, that it was really an Indian, and he was answering me saying, "Yeah, it's me. I'm here, and I'm haunting you." So a few nights later, and this is my last little anecdote, but this was the most frightening anecdote. The way our house was set up, again, you had a kitchen, and there were 2 steps down into the family room. And I was standing in the kitchen, but away from the 2 steps, maybe 3 or 4 inches away from the edge of the step. And my ex was sitting in the family room. We had this big coffee table in there. And he and I were once again arguing about the Indian ghost. And he was saying, I said, "You saw the proof, you saw it was under the dining room table." And he said, I think you put that there. I think you just did that to try and support your story." We were going back and forth, and the argument was getting more and more and more heated. And I said, "What is it gonna take?" And after I said that, I felt something push me, and I flew into the family room and landed at his feet, hitting my face on the coffee table. And he just looked at me, and I was somewhat dazed, and I said, "Now do you believe me?" Now obviously I hadn't jumped in there. I was pushed in there, and he could see that I was pushed. He got up, he got his car keys, and he left the house, and he was gone for a good 2 hours.
Oh my God.
And when he came home, I said, "Where were you?" He said, I can't deal with this. We're not talking about this anymore." And I said, "Do you think I staged that?" And he said, "No, I know you were pushed, but I can't handle that. We have a ghost here. I don't want to talk about it anymore." So those were my incidents, some of my incidents.
So what did he do with the Native American artifacts? Did he?
We put everything away. We put all those artifacts away because I felt it was a conduit. And, we still kept having problems off and on. Things would happen. I would open a cupboard, and something at the back of the cupboard would fly out at me.
That's ice.
Like that.
We're in a hotel. My daughter set it up to. She told me I set it up to make ice. And we're gonna say we'll debunk that.
Various things kept happening. The voices, the screaming, and through all of this, of course, I never really said anything to my daughter because I didn't want her to be afraid. But then time goes on, and we're still dealing with it, but I'm not talking to him about it anymore because he doesn't want to hear it. And then we wound up getting divorced, and the first thing I knew was I wanted out of that house. I just felt like this thing had it in for me and for my daughter. And I'll say one more anecdote, but it doesn't have to do with me. It has to do with my daughter. She was about 10, and it was a daddy weekend, as we call them, and she was in her bedroom. Now, when you came out of her bedroom, you took a left, it brought you down a hall, and another left put you into the bathroom. If you took a right, it was a wall, but there was a full-length mirror against that wall. I used to use that when I got dressed to see how I looked, head to toe. So one night she got up and she turned on the hallway light so she could see. She came out of her room, she took a left, she went to the bathroom. She came out of the bathroom, took a right. She could see her reflection in the mirror, and behind her is standing an Indian with a tomahawk raised as if he was going to hit her with the tomahawk. And she screamed bloody murder, and her father came out of his bedroom because when she saw that, she turned around and she couldn't see the Indian.
Yeah.
But her father opened his door and said, "What's going on?" And she said, "There's an Indian with a tomahawk." And he said, "Oh, your mother's been telling you stories," but I had never told her anything. So this was totally from her.
And how old was she at this
about
point?
10.
Okay.
And
Wow.
she also was afraid to be in her room. She always felt like she could hear voices and things in the closet. So I had encouraged her to switch her bedroom to the other empty room, which she did, and then she didn't deal with the voices anymore in her room.
Oh, wow.
But that also made me feel that there is an Indian haunting that house.
Wow.
And that's why I'm glad I don't live there anymore.
Well, he may have brought it in by bringing
I
in
think
those
he did,
artifacts.
bringing in the artifacts, and
Wow.
you know, if that was an Indian burial ground, that was enough to bring this entity in. But I feel like it's a haunted house, and it's not a good haunting.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
those were my scariest.
Well, thank you so much for sharing.
You're welcome.
Okay.